Many Kenyans working in the media industry are very worried, and quite rightly so. In case you haven't heard, there have been massive layoffs. During any crisis, you want to hear reassuring voices, reassuring familiar people, giving you the news, giving you updates, etc., etc. That's normal. And so Kenyan viewers and listeners have had to contend with the fact that they've lost many of their favorite news anchors, many of the journalists they look forward to listening to watching on television. And even newspaper readers have not been spared because their bylines they will no longer see. I was very shocked recently when somebody gave me the figure, the number of journalists fired, laid off at a major media house in Kenya. He gave the number of 172. And being very familiar with the media, because in my younger days, I worked for most of the major news outlets in the country, I did not believe this figure. I thought this guy was just joking. So I went and checked. And surprise, surprise. In fact, that figure was not quite accurate. It was a little on the lower side. Why? Because it did not take into account a couple of earlier layoffs. And I realized that the reason why I had disbelieved this figure initially is that I didn't realize it covered their TV stations, radio, and the newspapers. And of course, TV personalities are bound to be better known. But you see, the newspaper journalists are the most critical, in my opinion, because those are the people who do most of the donkey work. They research, they make calls, and because I also still do research, I know what's involved. A lot of dead ends, frustrations, before you get some small piece of information. That's normal. But for our show today, I'd like to draw your attention to a complaint by one of these fired journalists, which appeared on social media, because it gives us a clear pointer of what kind of media we should expect at the end of this crisis. Somebody was bitterly complaining that a journalist, very well qualified, with all the papers and then some, had been fired. And instead, this particular media house had hired a comedian. A comedian, who according to this post, was a Form 4 dropout. The insinuation there was very clear, that what our media houses are doing is that they're getting rid of experienced journalists and replacing them with comedians. Now, I want us to analyze that, because it illustrates very clearly where the Kenyan media is going. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But first, let me give you some interesting background. I still fondly remember the early days of journalism. Those days when most ordinary Kenyans would pick up a copy of the Sunday Nation, for instance, and read it cover to cover, every single article. In those days, the newspapers were much thinner, and they were in black and white. There was no color. But the content was high quality and super interesting. You'd read a newspaper and get very well informed of precisely what is happening around the country. And indeed, these are the newspapers that my late political lecturer used to train me for a job I was not aware I would do one day. Because I hated politics. But here I am as a political analyst. Anyway, Journalists in those days were not well paid. Yeah. However, they had something critical called integrity. Many of those journalists I interacted with in those early days were in journalism as a calling. Yeah, it wasn't just a job. They loved it, and to them, it was a calling. And taking an envelope, full of money, to skew a story or to slant a story in a certain direction was very rare. It used to happen once in a while, admittedly, but it was extremely rare. And I'll surprise you, most of these journalists were not well educated. No. In fact, I remember my utter shock one day when I was on the desk of the news editor and I was able to glance at the raw copy of a certain celebrity, leading journalist known all over the country. And it was very clear that this well-known leading journalist couldn't even construct one correct sentence in the English language, which he used to communicate in that newspaper. Of course, I later learned that the people who actually write the newspaper are the sub-editors. But the people who gather the content were these journalists I'm talking about. Now, you might be horrified, but the formula in those days worked. And then, a major media house in Kenya made a change of policy that not only changed everything, but brought us to this point, where there's this crisis of massive firing of journalists. The problem started a long time ago, with this policy decision. What was the policy decision? That they were no longer going to hire any journalists who do not possess a university degree. Now, on the surface of things, that makes sense. It looks like a great decision. But in actual fact, what happened is a lot of people were hired who did not have the journalism profession in their hearts. These journalists were much better paid, and they wanted to live in upmarket estates in Nairobi, and across the country. In sharp contrast, to the journalists before them, who used to stay in estates like Eastlands, closer to the people, closer to the real news, that would attract a vast majority of Kenyans. And that is how newspapers became very boring. And there are numerous other problems. You send in a journalist to a slum area like Mathare, and they're very uncomfortable, let alone the fact that they have no idea what goes on in a slum area. But let me come to my point quickly. The major consequence of all this is that the readers, the consumers of that news, responded immediately. I mean, who wants to buy a boring newspaper? Who wants to buy a newspaper written for the Lavington, Kileleshwa, Westlands crowd? And it is a business no-brainer that if you want to be a successful media house, your target is not those areas. No, your target is where the vast majority of Kenyans live. And media houses, to survive, responded by heavily relying on advertising and shooting up the advertising rates and using very clever marketing to sell that advertising. For instance, yes, our newspaper circulation is low, but we did a survey. How many people read one copy of our newspaper? According to our findings, over 10 people. So multiply that low circulation figure of ours by 10. You're going to reach your audience. Your advertising is going to pay, etc., etc. Let's fast forward to the present. According to this post on social media, a media house fires an experienced, qualified journalist with all the papers you want and some more, and replaces that journalist with a comedian with no papers. They're not even a journalist. And as painful as it is, it makes perfect sense. Because at the end of the day, a media house is a business. They have to make money. And the advertising revenue, that kept them going in the lie, if I can call it that, is now gone with the crisis. And so the reach, of that media house has now suddenly become extremely critical, even amid all the competition. And so you're a popular news anchor or you're a popular journalist. People love you, but how many in comparison to this comedian? Because most of the audience is in Westlands, Lavington, etc., etc. How many people, for instance, live in one mansion in Lavington who will take in your show? In comparison to the number of people who will want to listen to a certain comedian, living in some house in Kaungware, for instance, and indeed right across the country. So I'm sure you get my gist. Now, don't get me wrong. It is good to be qualified. It is excellent to have all the papers. But what matters the most is the audience, and especially the volume of that audience. How many millions are they? If you have them in millions right across the country, then it is not possible to fire you. It's as simple as that. Those are the new rules in our media houses. And it is not because the management, suddenly doesn't like people with papers. No. It is purely an economic decision. It's not personal. Now, this crisis would not have come at our time because technology has caused quite a lot of chaos and upheaval in traditional media all over the world, and especially in Kenya. You're printing a very good quality newspaper, targeted upmarket. And those people you're targeting are very busy. And when they're not busy, they have other ways of getting their news and information. It is unlikely that they'll buy your newspaper. And the people who really need your newspaper, you're not interested in. And if suddenly you're interested in them because of this virus crisis and though it has changed things, you can't reach them. You have to desperately look for ways to reach them. Like hire a comedian instead of a journalist. So, what will the Kenyan media look like? Let's say 5 years from now. Well, clearly, it's going to have a lot of comedians. Those with the talent and ability to garner a large audience, will dominate. And the quality of information will obviously go down. It's already not that good right now, but it'll get worse going forward. Media houses, to survive, will definitely lean much more towards entertainment, than information, valued, accurate information. But if there's a media outfit that will do the hard thing, of presenting quality information in an entertaining way, then they will rule Kenyan media. Very interesting times for the Kenyan media. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.